Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks all.
All right, and next to sign up was Tyler Jones. Give me one moment. Go ahead, Tyler.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Members of the commission, Councilwoman Del Chapo, city staff, my name is Tyler Jones with Charleston Cares. We are made up of Old South Carriage Company, Palmetto Carriage Works, and Charleston Carriage Works. So thanks for having me tonight. And I want to thank city staff for everything they've done over the last year during COVID and their patience and diligence over the last year dealing with the issue that is in front of you now. As you have been made aware, the local anti-carriage political group, Charleston Carriage Horse Advocates, proposed an ordinance last year to put new and arbitrary regulations on carriage tours. Here we are again, desperately trying to satisfy a group of people who are impossible to satisfy. Unless banning all carriage tours is in any of these ordinances, they are never going to be satisfied and they're never going away. This city council and the city tourism commission is well acquainted with the demands of this group. For the last year, city staff has bent over backwards to make sense of their nonsensical demands. And to fashion a fair ordinance requires the participation of people who want a solution more than they want to keep the issue before council and the commission until they get their way. And for years now, the carriage companies have endured harassment and relentless attacks from this political group. They have screamed at our customers, who, remember, are people visiting Charleston, screamed at our employees, picketed and protested in front of our barns, intimidated our barn workers to the point that many of them have quit because of the verbal abuse, and they've spread misinformation and lies about how we do business. You all have seen it for years, and for the new commissioners, you probably have as well. Yet here we are again, giving them a year of city time, city resources, city tax dollars, and a year of our time. And I don't have to remind you all that this past year has been the most difficult in the history of our community and the history of carriage tours here and for small businesses everywhere. COVID was devastating for our businesses, and we are just now getting back to something approaching normal. And just when we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, instead of focusing on growing our businesses and recouping our losses from the past year, we're back here again, fighting again for our existence, all because a very loud and very small minority of politically connected residents hired a high-priced New York City attorney to write an impractical ordinance that the city has given a year of its time. And the ordinance itself, it's comedic how unrealistic and unserious it is. The people who wrote it have no knowledge of carriage tours or horses. They don't know how they don't know anything about our operations, because many of the things they called for, we already do. And the rest of what they call for is completely unnecessary and arbitrary. So our group, Charleston Care, sat down about a year ago to review this group's ordinance line by line, and we truly thought it was a joke, that we had the wrong document, because surely no one could take this seriously. And then the city has spent a year trying to turn the unworkable into something halfway workable. And at the end of that year, the city narrowed that ordinance significantly to a much more realistic, but still imperfect document that is before you tonight. So although the carriage companies think this entire exercise is futile and unnecessary and rewards bad behavior, we are willing to compromise in order to continue our objective of being the safest and best run carriage community in the country. And the men and women who care for their horses and conduct tours here take pride in being the gold standard for carriage tours in the country. And we are. We are ready to assist the city with our expertise in crafting an ordinance that makes sense for everyone. But the ordinance written by the anti-carriage group is not full of good ideas, because that's not their goal. It's to hurt us and monopolize your time, this commission's time, and our time. And I know what that's like. A couple years ago, I was deposed by their group's attorney, Mr. Green, for the better part of 6 hours, just fishing for something they could take out of context to make our community look bad. And after 6 hours, they gave up and instead resorted to this. So members of the commission, we are tired of this game. We are tired of trying to operate our businesses while having to fight these battles with the same group every few months in front of this commission. Trust me, you have better things to do on this commission than to deal with the same issue repeatedly. So I ask you to send a message today: reject this nonsense. Don't let this group hold the commission hostage any longer, and don't let them monopolize city resources like they have done for so long. Carriage tours are the iconic backbone of Charleston tourism, and Charleston's economy depends on tourism. We are the #1 tourist attraction in this city for a reason. We've had a hell of a year, as have all working Americans. But don't kick us while we're down. Don't provide ammunition to a privileged political group whose sole purpose is to take us down and take us out. So I ask that you follow the lead of your colleagues on the tour guide subcommittee, who just yesterday rejected all of these proposals. This isn't the time, nor is any of this needed. I am here ready to answer any and all questions you may have over the course of this meeting, and I thank you for your service to the commission and to our city.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you. Next is Nicholas Green. If you give me one moment. All right, Mr. Green, I believe are you there?
I am here. If you can hear me, I can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Great. I'm happy to go on camera if it's easier for everyone to see who you're talking to, but I don't have anything to share on my screen. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. My name is Nicholas Green. I live in Ragboro with my 3 kids and my wife. This is the second night in a row I've had to sit through that, actually. I just want to correct one thing. I am a high-priced attorney. That's true. I do represent major clients at a major international law firm. I am not a New York City attorney, nor have I been hired by Charleston Carriage Works. I'm doing this pro bono, and I started working with them when Mr. Jones's client sued mine, leading to that deposition. Where I'm protecting their First Amendment rights. So I won't make any apologies for who I am or my efforts to better the city on behalf of visitors, residents, and my children, to be honest. With that, you have before you in your packet 3 ordinances. Our proposed ordinance, the ordinance put forward by the Department of Livability in conjunction with the Law Department, and the Carriage Industry's amendment to that ordinance. I really want to commend Mr. Riccio and especially Ms. Shear for their work on the ordinance that they put together. I had multiple conversations with them over the last year and admire their professionalism in those conversations and their willingness to take seriously council's direction that they go forward and attempt to work with stakeholders to come up with a comprehensive safety ordinance. And I want to be very clear. If you do nothing else, you should recommend that council pass the ordinance as proposed by Mr. Riccio and Ms. Shear in its entirety. We have tweaks and additions we would like to see, of course, but what they proposed is a dramatic improvement over the status quo. As Mr. Riccio stated in his cover letter to you, the ordinance represents a thoughtful dialogue between him and certainly myself and I assume other stakeholders, and reflects the department's and legal's view of an ordinance that's balanced, enforceable, and appropriate. I don't know exactly what the amendments put forward by Charleston Cares are attempting to do. I can't tell whether they oppose any additional regulation, if they are okay with certain things, but not. But we hear time and again that they already play by these rules and therefore nothing is necessary, in which case, of course, they shouldn't have a problem codifying them and ensuring that every member of the industry, because they do not actually represent every carriage organization, is playing by the same rules. Ms. Shear is, I suspect, going to walk you through the department's proposed ordinance and specifically the sections that are before you today in this committee. But I do want to just make a couple of comments on it. Why is this important? Like, why are we even here? Why did we propose this? Nobody has ever heard me once say that I think the carriage industry should go out of business. That is not the position of my client, which is a nonprofit made up of local citizens. Frankly, I don't really care one way or the other. I just want things to be safe in the city. And I want to know what's going on when I'm walking with my 4-year-old down the street. You know, is that animal trained? Has the animal been working on the streets of Charleston for a day or a decade? That matters to me. And I think it matters to our visitors as well. And it matters to the Charleston brand. I do agree with Mr. Jones that Charleston has an extremely strong tourism brand, and we've worked really, really hard to develop it. But what if we don't take bare minimum steps to enact regulation on an industry that has had accidents where people have been injured, property has been injured, and where accidents are invariably going to happen in the future? We can't allow ourselves to look back and say, was there something more we could have done? And what does it say about our brand that we gave up the opportunity to do it when we had the chance to? Because it will happen. That's inevitable. And we've accepted that as a cost of doing business in the city. Okay, fine. Let's move on from that and think about ways that we can do it as safely as possible, because the quality of our visitor experience simply means too much. Now, there are things we would like to see added to the department's proposed ordinance. Brakes, that's what they have in Savannah. Inspection of the barns annually by the health department or the fire department. Why not? Or having inspection of tack and equipment by an independent equine manager. I will note that I am especially supportive of the provision requiring inspection by a licensed professional of the carriages on an annual basis. These are homemade contraptions. There's no other way of saying it. They are not built in a factory that builds 17-person carriages. We are the only city with these large carriages. They are bespoke, and the people who made them do not have training to do it. Having somebody attest and put a license down and say, this is safe enough for what it's intended to do, is seriously the bare minimum that I think any responsible business should support. Now,
Mr. Green, just to know you are at time.
Mr. Chair, can I ask for 3 additional minutes to wrap up?
Yes.
Thank you. And you know, we've been accused of being unreasonable, and I make a living passing laws in legislatures all across the country. In fact, most sports betting bills written in this country came off my desk. I wrote them. I know that there is a balance. There is no such thing as a perfect law, and so I'm not trying to let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. But there are 2 things that I do want to note that I think demonstrate our goals and the reasonableness of what we've attempted to do. The first is that we've proposed a simple reporting requirement that anytime an animal comes into a touring herd, the operator simply file a statement with the city saying, here's the animal, their name, microchip number, has the animal worked in an urban environment before or Charleston, and where did the animal come from? That's it. The Department of Livability makes that available on the website. There's no other attachment to it. It is simply an education exercise for the public and visitors. Because if I'm going to take a carriage tour ride, I may want to look and see, is this a carriage company that's using brand new ponies that have never been on the streets before? Or, as we've been told, using animals that have been on the streets for a decade plus? What is the harm in doing that? There is none. The second is the training requirement. What we proposed was not to impose any specific training program on them, but rather, here are the things you need to do, teach about equine safety, et cetera, and develop a written structured program and submit it to the city for review. That's it. The department's proposed ordinance adopts the Kona Standards. You might ask yourself, what is that? It's the trade association for the carriage industry. Their actually mission is to support the carriages in New York or Chicago and any number of jurisdictions that actually are moving away from carriages, unlike Charleston. And so their website says that those standards are designed to make your business a profitable one. It doesn't say anything about safe. But more importantly, what are we doing enshrining this inside of a city ordinance, this private trade association? And I have not actually reviewed these guidelines because they are not available to the public. I'm not a member of this organization. So I would encourage you to, on those particular points, adopt our language in toto and ask Ms. Shearer and Mr. Riccio to include that, and then move the rest of their ordinance, and as well as anything else you want to include in there, onto the full commission and council with a do pass recommendation. And I'm going to stay on the line, and please feel free to ask me any questions as you're speaking. Happy to answer. thank you for your time and thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Next for public input is Broderick Christoph. Broderick, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, members of the subcommittee and city staff. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Broderick Christoph, and I'm with Charleston Carriage Works. I've been part of the carriage community here in Charleston for over 25 years. I'm asking that your subcommittee take the same action that last night's subcommittee took and recommend disapproval of the anti-carriage group's request to rewrite the ordinance. Subcommittee members last night recognized both how difficult a time this is for businesses, all businesses, and the decades-long pattern of harassment by Ellen Hawley's various acronymic groups that seek to ban carriages. The carriage community has just started our recovery from the pandemic. Their group relentlessly harasses us and city staff and encourages each other to disrupt our operations physically. Just yesterday, on yet another false fundraising post, an anti-carriage member on Facebook suggested that Mayor Tecklenburg was getting checks from the carriage community under the table. At yesterday's subcommittee meeting, during the anti-carriage group lawyer, Mr. Green's public comment webinar, and then again today, he mischaracterized, among other things, Kona, the carriage operators of North America, as putting profits ahead of safety. He suggested that the city should not rely on Kona regarding standards because they are but a trade organization. Now, on a scale, attorneys by and large are intelligent people, and I'm fully aware of how some may rank people who work with livestock on that scale. I once heard a judge say to an attorney who was repetitively driving the same point from numerous angles, "That's enough, I get it. I don't have hay in my teeth." At which point I thought, hey, and then I checked to see if I did. My point is that Mr. Green's objections to relying on an organization composed of operating members who use the opinions and experience of colleagues to codify best practices is ironic, considering that a state bar is likewise constructed and the precedential nature of the law is nothing other than exactly the opinions and experience of other attorneys. I think Mr. Green and the anti-carriage group's position demonstrates their veiled contempt of the carriage community more than it speaks to the process. Their rewrite of our ordinance was determined to be unworkable, and their desire to rewrite it is the only reason we're all here. He just told you that they will settle for the city's version and then pursue innumerable tweaks and changes. That's your outline for the next several years. In closing, you're all about to spend hours going through something that is unneeded and untimely. Furthermore, the impetus for these proposed changes comes from a group that wants to ban carriages. Among the things that we have all learned over the last year is municipalities do not have a duty to compromise with any group that is ideologically opposed to another group's existence, be it because of race, gender, nationality, or in this case, business type. As such, I ask that you recommend disapproval of the ordinance rewrite. In preparation for the full commission meeting on the 23rd of this month, I also encourage all of you to spend some time reading the anti-carriage group's social media pages to see what they are about for yourselves. I'm sure Mr. Green can provide the links. Thank you again for your time and voluntary service to the citizens of Charleston.
Thank you, Broderick.
That is all of the people who had signed up. We do have one person who has raised their hand. I'd be happy to allow them to speak if everyone would like.
And is it clear they want to speak to us?
It looks like now there are two people who have raised their hands. But again, these were not people who signed up with our office ahead of time that I'm aware.
Generally speaking, you know, we take a count as to who needs to speak at the beginning of the meeting, and we usually restrict that to those people. Certainly this is in the discretion of the chair. The chair can do what he feels is appropriate.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I'll follow that guidance. Tim, would it be appropriate for them to post a question in a chat for us to consider, or should it not be at all?
Well, I think that it's probably better if people didn't sign up that they're not going to be able to provide comment. They can always provide written comment. There's going to be a full Tourism Commission meeting, and I will say to everybody who is listening that I would encourage you to submit written comments to the city, which can then be distributed to all members, because again, we'll do the same thing at the Tourism Commission meeting. But if we have 10 people who need to speak, everybody might only get a minute or 2 minutes to speak. So I encourage you, if you have comments, we want them, send them in. As it relates to these two people, I would not suggest chat.
All right, thank you. I'll follow that guidance as chair.
All right.
Thanks, Lee.
Then moving on to the next item on the agenda is moving on to the items of discussion. Dan had asked me to read a portion of the letter that was sent out to all of the committee members before we begin, just to kind of outline what we plan to do. The Charleston Carriage Horse Advocates, through their representative, Attorney Nicholas Green, submitted a proposed ordinance to the city on or about August 2020. The city's typical protocol when ordinances and amendments are requested is for city staff, including legal staff, to write the ordinances. Our staff carefully reviewed the proposal and worked over many months with the city legal department to draft a preliminary ordinance in response. The city drafted a proposal that we believe to be effective, enforceable, and legally proper. The version was shared with the carriage industry and the Charleston Carriage Horse Advocates. Representatives of the carriage industry generally agreed, but responded with some recommendations. Charleston Carriage Horse Advocates attorney Nicholas Green, after a review of the city ordinance, asked that their original proposal to go before the Tourism Commission as written, along with our proposal. The Tourism Commission and its subcommittees are asked to review the City of Charleston preliminary amendments, Exhibit 1, the Charleston Carriage Horse Advocates proposal, Exhibit 2, and their response to from the representatives of the carriage industry, Exhibit 3. The route subcommittee will deal with the portions relating to training, design, safety, and compliance, which is covered by sections 4 through 7 and sections 9 through 12. Each committee will report to the entire Tourism Commission at the meeting on June 23rd, and if the commission passes a recommendation, it will be sent to City Council for their review and decision as to whether to pass what is recommended, to reject it, or to modify it. And from there, Mr. Doman, Ms. Shear, if you would like to take it from there.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, I'd like to first off thank the city staff for all the work that they did. Like everybody has said, they did spend a significant amount of time going through everything. I would also like to thank both sides, the advocates, both for the carriage horses and the carriage horse advocates. A lot of work and a lot of thoughtfulness was put forth by both sides, and city staff did a great job, I think, of trying to put a fair, reasonable ordinance forward for y'all to be considering. As Lee stated, I'm going to go through several sections for y'all to consider. I'm going to screen share. Since you all have that in your packets, I'm going to go kind of quickly, just for time considerations, but y'all are welcome to jump in and ask questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to go through anything when we are finished. So give me a moment while I screen share. Oh, give me a second. It's not making a full one. All right, can y'all see that all right? No. Sorry. All right, there we go. All right.
Within the screen, if you can, yeah, there you go. Thanks.
That a little better?
A lot better.
All right. All right, so I'll start with the first, in sections 4, 5, 6, and 7, I'll begin with. So this is what people were talking about earlier when we were talking about having just basic training, certifications. What we propose to be adding to the city ordinance is having annual training. This first section is focused on having approved training for tour guides and the carriage operators. Basically in the accordance of the Carriage Horse Organization of North America, which is what they were discussing earlier, Kona, which does have basic standards in terms of training. The second part of this training certification is focused on, for every employee that comes into contact with the horses. So essentially, some of the barn staff would be required to meet these standards. And then also any employees, regardless of anything of their status, would also need to meet the specific standards set forth in Kona. We do ask in this ordinance that they do provide certification every year, that this mandated training has been completed. So we can help ensure that these basic safety standards have been met. The next section that we are talking about adding would be that there is an annual inspection by a third-party engineer or mechanic possessing a valid professional license. This would just ensure that all the carriages do meet a basic safety standard, and this just would be codified within the ordinance, and a little bit more specificity than what currently does exist. The next section we're looking at is just adding some basic or enhancing the current light requirements to the carriages. So we would like is any carriage operating during or after sunset or at any time when windshield wipers are in use, such as rain, sleet, or snow, or any sort of inclement weather that could potentially, severely reduce the ability for vehicles, drivers' vision. There would be a requirement to have adequate LED lighting and high reflectivity markers on the front, back, and sides of the carriage, as well as on the harness of the animal. The next section that we're asking y'all to consider is just to help ensure that the equipment is standard and proper. The collars for the harness should obviously be appropriately sized. The harnesses, collars, blinders, bits, and bridles should be safe, not frayed, and be adequately prepared. Then we're going to scroll down. I think the next section is 9 that we are looking at. And we are here just adding that there would be a required for the certificate of appropriateness that everybody is obviously in compliance with this ordinance. We just got to ensure that we do have the capability to be moving it forward. Sorry. So then when the next section that we're looking at, we are asking that the carriages start to follow all posted traffic signs, including stop signs. Currently, right now, my understanding is they can roll through, and we're just asking them to follow the same rules of the road as other vehicles. If they are operating, after sundown, we are asking that they do inform, receive written consent from the Department of Livability. This is just once again because of the visibility at nighttime. Something that the city staff did feel was important to be added and codified within our ordinance. And the last section that we're asking for y'all to consider today is that the carriage companies do designate at least one employee per shift to be trained in equine triage or first aid to be able to be deployed should there be an equine emergency. This is just having basic safety standard training and just ensuring that all of that does take place. They're also requiring that every equine involved in a reportable accident must be inspected by a licensed equine vet, certifying that the animal is able and ready to return to service. And any animal that is involved in a reportable accident or incident needs to be once again inspected before service. So these are the sections that we're asking for y'all to look at today. Like I said, this has been considered from city staff, especially with input from our equine manager. I'm happy to help answer any questions, and I will end my screen share.
Mallory, this is Brumby. I'd like to ask a question about the letter that Dan wrote to us. It talks about the ordinances written by legal staff. This seems to be an ordinance that was written by a anti-carriage organization and then given to the city as a project. Is that normal? Like, does the Hotel Association give y'all a nightly rental, anti-nightly rental ordinance to put in place or review? Like, it seems like you guys would have written it, but instead this was guided by outside. I just want to make sure I understand that process as outlined.
Well, the city did receive the ordinance from the carriage horse advocates, but I would not say that they wrote it. We reviewed it. If you compare the two, you will see some additives from the city that was not even included in the original submitted by the advocates. As I believe the lights and the times was something that city staff reviewed best practices in other communities. I believe Savannah was one. And so there is a significant amount of input that the city took. And this is what the city staff felt was important to have added to our ordinance.
And if I could chime in, you know, this portion to us is important. Training, equipment, safety when operating the carriage, and adhering to the same laws that they're required to do as a driver. So it is not normal for anybody to come up and just say, here's a set of ordinances that we want passed. And that's why we really thoughtfully over several months, it was Mallory, myself, Amy Sutherland, Lee Burbage, Shannon Tillman, the equine managers, literally went through all of these, and we did feel that the concerns were real, and we felt that this would be, especially tonight's issue in the subcommittee, is important. You know, it's basically tweaking and adding a little bit to what we already have, but it does make sense for training and equipment to be in the right manner. So, yeah, I mean, we normally, if someone gives a proposal to the city, it goes to legal and the staff member is directly involved. And that's what we did. We just kind of worked backwards with it. We were given it up front. I explained to city council that that's not how the city protocol works. And then we went back to the table as a group. We vetted it. We researched, we did homework, and really thoughtfully went through this to see what was reasonable. And that's what we came up with, this document that we felt was equitable. It was legal and practical to enforce. So I hope that explains it.
And I wrote down lighting, training, and equipment. Was there one other you mentioned that I missed that were important?
I think that's it that we're talking about more tonight. What else, Mal?
I
Anything
think
else?
it's all important.
It's all important. It's all important. Thank you, Mallory. That's why I retained her.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and wondering which of these isn't important to a carriage operator, because it seems like these would all be very important to them, that they're safe, that they're trained, and that their equipment works. That would be a going concern of any licensed business in our community. So
we agree. We agree wholeheartedly.
Okay.
We're not saying that the ordinances that were proposed by the advocates were, you know, were totally wrong. We just we felt there were bits and pieces out of it that we felt were absolutely 100% correct. Other parts of the ordinance we felt was not. And it wasn't either required by, prohibited by law to increase fines and things of that nature that we can't do. So, and to address Mr. Green's information about having the building inspector and DHEC override and as an additional inspection component to the process, we researched it, and that's not doable by state standards or the building official. And what we have on the books now with our process is the process that we go by and legally justified to do so. And quite honestly, one of the only cities in the country that does have this ordinance to inspect and things of that nature.
Mr. Chairman, part of what the discussion was last night was what you pointed out earlier, which is being that the spirit of this particular ordinance came from an opposing group to the horse carriage industry. Is that a concern, right? Is because of where it comes from, do we have to be concerned that the language and the spirit of it is not needed? And/or a reasonable person would say, are they not addressing the things that Dan just described, the training and the design and the safety and the compliance? And does the livability have a reason to doubt that? And I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any kind of concern or approach that says that they're not doing the things they have. In fact, just on the training alone, we learned last night that they do 100 hours of training before they're even allowed to go out and take part into a tour. So I'm just curious as to, comes back to what we discussed. Is this the right time to put these kinds of additional regulations in place? And number two, are we assuming that they're not being done already, right? Because of what you said, that a reasonable business would do that already, just in its own spirit.
I'm sorry. I obviously defer to the subcommittee, and I appreciate y'all taking, the step back to look at everything from the big picture. I do want just to point out in terms of the 100 hours of training, I don't believe every carriage company is represented by Mr. Jones. And so having training that is codified by the Kona Standards at least puts all the companies on that basic playing field. So everybody would be that minimum standard that maybe many, but maybe not all, already adhere to.
And another position I would like to add that obviously one of the most common issues we have is a carriage incident or accident. Horse gets, spooked or whatever. And we felt that having a educated, certified, some type of triage equine person on staff is very important, because quite frankly, we don't see that across the board. I'm not saying CARES. We have the CARES group, and then we have one company not in the CARES group. So we have to, like Mallory said, be consistent across the board. That's why the standards need to be met and implemented. But to me, having a triage person to first respond before any vet gets on the scene, I feel is very important. But we lost an equine because of that this past year. And that's, and again, all of this is important. We agree with that it could be costly, but at least have one person on staff that's knowledgeable enough and trained enough to deal with that situation. And again, we're not segregating CARES versus others, but it needs to be consistent across the board.
Dan and Mallory, I want to follow. Mr. Green talked about the Kona documents not being available, but you guys seem to reference them extensively in your ordinance proposal. Does that mean you had a chance to see those?
I've reviewed them.
Okay. Thank you.
And the city ordinance already does reference Kona. So it's something that the city has previously been comfortable with.
And so there's only one carriage organization that's not a member of Kona or following the guidelines of Kona. What was that last thing you said, Dan?
I will say that all the carriage companies don't belong to CARES. There is a slight division. Not saying that they all don't adhere to that, but I think since it's not one total carriage group, it's hard to set a set of standards for one and not the other. It's got to be, across the board. And we discussed it at length with Kona. They are one of the only, probably the only national organization, and we reviewed their training and their guidelines. And I know there was mentioned trade organizations. I don't really concern myself with that. I concern myself with their standards and them being a legal codified entity that we can look to for some type of guidance. And that's what we did with this ordinance. Let's be real here. Carriage industry, it's not a typical, you can't go to a gas station and get your carriage fixed. It's a different entity with different standards, and we understand that. So we have to roll with the punches, but we felt that Kona was a strong organization with very good standards that were national, and we felt that was important to follow instead of just saying, well, just do this training or come up with this training. They have specific guidelines that we felt that were professional and legal to follow.
And I would also just like to add, although the Kona is what y'all are looking at today, we can also obviously modify it. I believe it was the city of Savannah's ordinance does require trainings by carriage companies, but theirs does not reference Kona's. We just felt that having that as a basic standard was important, but just wanted to throw that out there for y'all to consider as well. We currently do not require any of the training, although the companies are obviously self-incentivized to have proper training of staff.
I wanted to ask a question about the following of traffic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Council.
I was supposed to say, it looks like Councilmember Del Chapo had a raise her hand.
That's okay. I agree with following, a national standard. We're not in the carriage industry. It would be like me trying to tell, an airline how to operate. You look to those people who are in that, and they deal with this day in and day out, and they're experts in it. So if there's a national entity that sets these kind of standards, I think that levels the playing field and makes it fair. I do some of the, what I'm kind of hearing from other comments is, and a lot of times what I feel is where we like overly regulating, and maybe holding different businesses, Brumley, to your point, do people, we don't overhaul what a hotel could charge per night because somebody is upset by it. I think the process we're going through now with this coming through the appropriate committee and then going to council, this is the right way for it to work. This is a good process. This is how it works. This allows the public to be engaged. I'm all for safety for the folks who work at the carriage companies, for those animals, for people who are participating and getting that experience of a carriage ride, for people who live here, people who work here. That's my number one job as an elected official, is public safety. So any sort of safety parameters, I'm all for. I guess sometimes where I start to struggle a little bit and like to hear of what other cities do is Are we at all maybe going too far, pushing the needle too far? And I'm not saying we are. I'm just throwing that question out there of, what's the sense? I will be brutally honest, and I think that the advocates group, their ordinance, that pushed way too far. And as to Dan's point, made some recommendations that are not, even allowed. We're not even allowed to do. I think somewhere between the city's draft ordinance and some of those elements that CARES put together, and to clarify for anyone who isn't clear, CARES is made up of 3 of the local carriage companies. They've come together and they, kind of set their own standards and their own advocacy and hold each other accountable, which is a great thing to do. More businesses should do that with each other and collaborate. I think somewhere in between those 2, I think we have something that upholds public safety, which is what we want to do. I know that's what Dan wants to do. That's what his office does. Specifically, if I look at, like, for example, the lights, in the city, we have the adequate LED lighting and high reflectivity markers. CARES recommended DOT approved lights. I'm curious what the difference between that is. I, as an outsider, when I see like DOT approved, that seems to me safer. So I'm curious, even like, things like that, should we look at what CARES is saying? Would that actually be safer, or maybe it's not? I don't know. I'm just asking the question, like, as somebody, again, just reading that, DOT approved sounds a little bit, brighter, better than an LED light. I'm not sure. So just wanted to get some clarity around some of those things.
As to the DOT lighting, I'm not sure what the difference between the LED versus the DOT lighting, and which would be stronger or safer. I do know that the current ordinance with the lighting, because this has been an issue in the past with some in the rain, where again it was some of the companies had more than adequate lighting, others it was lower, it wasn't quite as adequate. The lighting, here it is, I believe it was the visible from 500 feet. Sometimes, especially on our streets, that was difficult to prove with photo and video as far as enforcing it, whether or not it was visible from 500 feet, especially given conditions, if it was raining, different things like that, which is why we went with the LED lighting, or we were looking even at, we looked at defining how many lumens each light could be. However, lumens is not a generally accepted standard of a lighting measure. It's something we see on a lot of products, but it's not a widely accepted unit of measurement. So which is why we went with just standard LED lighting, which is what bicycle lights, like bicycle safety lights, tend to go by, which is why we went in that direction.
And just to piggyback, that was perfect, what Lee just demonstrated, because when we looked at this too, we reevaluated what problems we were having as officers out there trying to enforce. Visibility is a huge one. And it was a recommendation of Shannon Tillman that, most of these are battery operated little lights, and you could have a dull, a dull light with a battery on the back of a carriage that you can't see beyond 50 feet, much less 500 feet. So we came up with the consensus of an LED light, which is more visible to the eye at a greater distance. So we did, like Lee said, did all the research, and LED seemed to be the brighter of that used less wattage, if you will, on battery operated instruments. So, and that's the reason why we did that, just for added explanation. It's what our guys are experiencing out there when trying to enforce.
Do we have any other questions regarding any of the proposed ordinances? Brumby, I believe you're still on mute.
Hey, Lee, thank you. I wanted to go back to what I was going to ask before I accidentally interrupted Council DeCapia. Sorry about that. I'm not in support of this ordinance, but I want to see if I can give an example why. I want to take section 11, for instance. All animal-drawn carriages shall follow posted traffic signs, including without limitation stop signs and traffic signals. This city is not designed as a modern city, right? There's all sorts of things going on, unlevel sidewalks, unlit areas. They can't go the speed limit. There's people walking out in front of you, jaywalking. Like, I think the freedom to navigate this city, much like a biker or a walker, it's challenging because of its authenticity. Why would starting and stopping more a carriage? It's like, I look at airlines, landing and takeoff are the most dangerous, right? Stopping and like, what is the evidence that this is a good thing to do? Why not give a carriage operator who's experienced the ability to navigate and understand the dynamics of this kind of multivariable environment they're operating in? I mean, the construction, the noise, the cars, the bikers, the people going the wrong way. Like, I don't see any evidence that this is a good, like, we're making it better. And so it feels onerous to me. And then why not operate after sundown? That's when the city population drops. That's when there's fewer people out on the street and less cars. Like, so I just kind of looked at this going, I'm not sold on that. And I don't like the way it came. I expressed that process early on. I don't like the timing of the pandemic. I would love to see this, if there's a lighting issue to come at. What I did hear is that, hey, the training's not consistent. Mallory revealed that not all the, someone claimed 100 hours, but not all of them. And equipment, but I think this needs to kind of go back to the drawing table, is where I'm leaning, and maybe come from the city and the carriage operator. Like, what are the incidents that are leading to this that needs to be reconsidered? I think we could be a little more thoughtful of the tour the companies that are operating, right? We're changing some rules on them that I just, was there a call from council that, hey, 7 members, right? We got to look at this. I just don't, there's no evidence of that, right? That's not what Dan wrote to us. Dan wrote that, this other group put this stuff in front of us. So that's where I'm leaning. And Lee, if you want to guide kind of where we go from here to make that, or someone else wants to follow up, I'll be quiet.
Well, this is Tim Delman. From a legal standpoint, if all discussion has occurred, then typically somebody would make a motion. Now, of course, you could have a motion to recommend approval and make a motion to report this out to the full committee with a positive recommendation, or report it out with a negative recommendation, or you could make a recommendation to a certain portion being reported out favorably and a certain portion unfavorably. But we are going to have to take it to the full commission. I don't think that there's an ability to just stop it right here. I think we're going to have to go back to the full commission. And then at that point in time, if there was a directive for us to work on it some more and change something, I think we can potentially talk about that at that point.
I'm not necessarily making a motion, but I like the idea of consistency of training, of, those types of things. You know, kind of like a business has to, you know, display their business license, that, you know, this is kind of their thing that they have to display, making sure that's consistent, again, from a, you know, public safety perspective. I guess, you know, some of these things, again, I just have a hard time wondering if we're going too far. And you know, I like to see everybody playing by the same rules, without it making the game impossible to play. And I think that's you know, like what my gut is telling me, and kind of some consensus that I feel is in this, we can call it our room. You know, so and that's kind of where I stand with it. You know, I don't think this would, you know, I don't think as it stands right now, and I know the energy and the effort and the research and everything that has gone into it, but I don't think we're there yet. And I wouldn't recommend for full approval of this. An overarching theme that maybe we then massage a little bit more, I would be comfortable making that recommendation to the full commission.
And if I can just make one comment, please, that our team is really, since we formed as a department in 2015, we're the same group, Amy, Leah, myself at the upper level. We have made it a point to review ordinances all along as issues arise, and there's an issue that comes up. We vet it. Do we need to change the ordinance? And we've done that several times through normal processes. So actually, we enacted we amended an ordinance for the last carriage accident about harnessing and strap ties, and which was successful. And knock on wood, we haven't had a horse or escape since. So I just wanted, yes, we worked very hard on this, but with that said, we have been working very hard all along. So I leave it to you to decide as a subcommittee.
So Tim, the three choices that we're presented with tonight are reject, modify, send forward a recommendation. What is that?
In general, that's probably true, either to recommend the ordinance, to report it out negatively, to just to say that we do not recommend the ordinance, or to make a decision that certain parts are good and certain parts are not. That's entirely up to y'all and the way you word the motion, and then we can take a vote on whatever motion comes out of that discussion.
Anyone that's looking to make a motion on this? Lorraine, yeah, I was hoping you'd have something to say.
I'll open my mouth.
You're quiet.
I don't know. Just like seemed like thing to do. Now, I would like to see us, and I would like to recommend that we go with the number 2, and which is the city and Dan and his recommendation as our choice, knowing that there are these 2 other options that might be considered. But I would like to see the number 2 put to the committee as a recommendation, and then we can massage that if we need to.
So what I'm hearing you say is you want Exhibit 2 to be to the city, the one that was actually.
That's the cities.
The cities was Exhibit 1.
Yeah. And so.
Wait a minute. I don't know that that's correct, Mallory.
No, that's not right.
Yeah, Exhibit 1 is,
It's from that outside committee.
I think there might be a difference in the letter and the order. Let me verify though. Yeah, so Exhibit 1 is the preliminary,
Yes.
Yes, that's the cities.
but that's the cities. That's what
Oh, that's the city.
Mallory and them wrote.
You're right. Mallory, you're right. Yes.
Okay, good.
Right. Well, then I'm
Doesn't
suggesting,
happen often.
what?
I'm sorry, I was
was-
joking about myself. My apologies.
So, as I understand it, the first one is from the committee that put the new proposals and the new rules for the city to consider, the Tourist Commission to consider. The second one was Dan's adjustment of that one and his massaging of that and changing the rules slightly. Then the carriage people is the third one. Am I wrong about that? Is that
that's-
wrong?
I understand that to be incorrect. The letter says that the Exhibit 1 is the City of Charleston preliminary ordinance. They're calling it preliminary in that it's their version that they put together. Then
Their version.
Exhibit 2 is the Nicholas Green Group, CCHA. And then the third was a response. They allowed the carriage.
Okay, then take that back. Then I'm recommending that we accept the number 1 as our recommendation to be continued to be studied on, and if any changes, if they feel I said that better before. If there are any changes,
Following you
they
this
can
time.
be done to that city one, but I think that the city recommendations are the best, most reasonable, and should be recommended to the Tourist Commission.
Okay, Tim and Lee, I want to make sure, and Mal, I want to make sure I understand this. So Lorraine is making a motion. We would need a second to then go to a vote. Is that correct? And who would be voting on the screen tonight?
It would be Ms. Evans, yourself, and Councilmember Del Chapo.
Say that one more time.
It would be Ms. Evans,
Uh-huh.
yourself as the chair, and Councilmember Del Chapo.
Okay, so do we have a second to Lorraine's motion to go forward with the city's preliminary ordinance?
Before I second that, if I could just get a clarification. So if we vote in favor of Lorraine's motion, that will still afford us the opportunity when we go before full committee to maybe rework some things.
Well, accept it as a
before it
recommendation,
gets to council, correct?
accept it as a recommendation,
Mhm.
not endorsement of number 1, but a recommendation that we explore number 1 again and
Okay.
massage.
I'll second. I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay, so what I have is there's a motion to be voted on for Exhibit 1. So there's only 3 of us voting. So
You go do.
I'm going to vote.
There's any-
no.
If there's no further discussion, then you call for a vote, and then by raise of hands, we can figure out what the vote is.
So any further discussion? All right, so all in favor of that motion?
You
Raise
want
your
us to raise our hands or?
Raise your hand, yeah. 2. All against? 1. Okay, so by a 2-to-1 margin, it is being reported out to the full committee in a favorable way, with the caveat that both the motion specified that we should be willing to look at modifications. All right, Lee, is there any other business that we need to address? You're on mute.
Can't
Mute,
hear you. Okay.
mute.
Sorry, I want to make sure that my dog didn't interrupt the meeting. The next on the agenda is if we have any new business or old business to discuss.
I had one last question. Tim, is it possible to do an alternative motion that might have a 3-0 support, or once a motion goes, is it over? Meaning, could we focus on the comments by Member Del Chapio about the focus on training and to go like, or is this done?
Well, you can't do something that's going to be inconsistent with the motion that you just passed, but if you need some other motion, then perhaps we could entertain that. Normally we're voting in favor of at a city council level, you're voting in favor of a first reading or not. You're adopting the law or not. You're making motions to amend it. This is a slightly different situation. You're making recommendations. And so if you said, well, you know what, in addition, I think I would like to make a recommendation that for sure we have those lights, or I want to make a recommendation instead that we have DOT lights and not LED lights. I don't think it would be improper for you to make that recommendation, for it to be of record, for therefore the full Tourism Commission to know that recommendation. But somebody's going to have to make those motions and decide what you want to do.
This is the very beginning anyway, isn't it? I mean, as far as it getting to the committee. So, okay.
Yes.
Thanks for the
Just
guidance.
trying to wrap up something so that we can make a progress here. That leaves it open, when the recommendation simply leaves it open, that when it goes to Tourist Commission, then you can say, well, I'd like to add something to that recommendation. I'd like to add that these things need to go in there. Whatever your choices are.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Okay. Unless you would like to, someone would like to make an additional motion.
Motion to adjourn, perhaps by someone.
So moved.
Second.
And do we have a second?
I do.
Of
All
course
right.
you got to.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for attending. And we will be in touch very soon.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good
Oh,
night.
thank you very much.
Have a nice night.